Welcome back, everybody. Working on 1113 tonight, and unfortunately the shop was a mess. We've got this bench full of wiring stuff. Senior's been doing some wire harness work on the Super M, and he's got some more wiring stuff there, and we've got some wiring stuff there, and some wiring stuff here. But anyway, we have kind of the 1113 corner right here with X231 sitting in the back. You're looking as stubborn as ever, my dear. The best way to clean up a shop is, well, to start putting parts back on tractors, right? So let's just concentrate on this nice little work of art radiator here that Glenn up at Hermantown Radiator just did an excellent job on. I could just stare at that thing all day. It's awesome. But a little bit of housekeeping to take care of first. You guys might be aware now that I've got 3 different playlists going for 1113. That is because I'm trying to use hindsight in how I'm compiling all this stuff. So if I put all of the reconditioning of that entire machine together in one playlist, it would end up being, after all is said and done, here's like 150 videos, and if you're only interested in a final drive video, well, you got to scroll through and try and find it. So to try and simplify things a little bit, I decided to break it up into segments. So, you know, this one's going to be under like the diesel engine playlist, which I think we're in part 40 something now, or 50, I can't remember, I got to look back. But the initial recovery of 1113 and initial teardown and diesel engine is one playlist. The starting system, like starting engine or pinion drive, is another playlist. And then everything else like transmission, final drives, undercarriage, that's all in the chassis playlist. So if you want to go back and find a certain part of a D2 to kind of see what's inside, how I fixed it, all this and that, it should be a little bit easier to at least narrow it down to one of those 3 playlists, and you won't have such a long list to go through. So just getting this radiator core back on the engine is going to free up quite a lot of room. But before we can do that, we have to look at the surround for it. Of course, this has some issues, but I tell you what, those stamped tags are just in excellent condition on this thing. The Caterpillar one up top, and then the Caterpillar and D2 tags over here. Not very often you find those looking that good. So I did remove the oil cooler from the front of the radiator the other day, or the shell, I should say. These studs in the corners are what located that oil cooler, and I had to remove a couple of these oil line fittings. This is kind of a T that went on the end right here, and then this one came out pipe and everything. The reason I had to remove these is because they pass through these round holes, and they won't come back out with those line fitting T's on the end. So I removed those. We didn't suffer any damage from that. It's a good clean looking core, yet we have some old, looks like dried oil down here, so we're going to be taking a look at that and make sure we don't have any leaks. But before we can put the radiator core in the shell, we have, well, this dent up here needs to be taken out. The whatever something that fell on top of 1113 at one point in time also put a pretty good divot right there, so we're going to be taking that dent out of there. We have some, looks like insulator pads. It's kind of like a woven belting down here. 2 pieces. This one's mostly deteriorated and gone. It's going to be in our best interest to protect our investment in that reconditioned core to renew these right down here. That's probably going to require taking the bottom piece out right here that they are riveted to, because you can't get to anything on the back side, and it looks like we're just welded here and here, and then a center spot weld here, and that whole piece should come out of there. So that's going to make it a lot easier to renew those. And down here on the bottom, I think we have a broken off bolt in a block in here, and in this block here, you can see where the block is welded. That's where the threads are. I think the rest of those are all open, so that's also going to give us an opportunity to maybe repair that at the same time if we get this piece out of the way. Okay, the middle is free, and don't worry about the material removed there. We'll replace that with weld. Boy, did I ever scrape a lot of stuff out of here. Glad I was able to get this piece out and at least get that stuff cleaned. So we've done a little bit of reconditioning on the shell here. I did take it back out to that big metal table and we got that wrinkle popped out of there. So returned the profile back to normal. You can't even tell that dent was ever there. And I've also been around checking all the threaded holes in this thing. Got all these on the sides. All that stuff was really good. Got blocks welded in there for light brackets, what have you. And I checked out everything down here. We're all good on these holes except for there are broken bolts there and there. And I thought that only these blocks were threaded. Turns out they welded the blocks on and then threaded the block and this heavy 1/4 inch thick brace down the bottom of the core. Makes sense because you get a lot more threads that way, but my bolts are broken off down in a few threads there. So, well, I've got some ideas as to how to get those out. We're not going to address that quite yet. I think I'm going to work on this bottom insulator pad piece first. Clean the backside a little bit. It's not looking horrible. So we have these pieces of, it looks like woven belting that we have to replace. You can see, well, this one's quite deteriorated. A lot of it's gone, but there are traces of metal, I don't know what to call them, just like these flat metal strips that used to be in there, held on by rivets. You can see the rust marks there, there, and also there. Doing a little bit of archaeology detective work from the remains of this one, I could tell that they were 3/4 of an inch wide by 3 inches long. And, like I said, woven belting. Luckily, Senior is a hoarder of all things line shaft, sawmill, and belt driven related, so we have all kinds of this woven belting around. This is kind of some rubber impregnated stuff, so I've cut this piece to match right there. Then this piece is over here. This is a smaller square piece. And I've popped out 4 blanks of 16 gauge flat steel to replicate those little flat strips that were in there to hold those down. So what I'm going to do, these are rather large headed, they almost look like brake lining rivets over here, and you can see the smaller tabs or the smaller nubs back here. I'm going to probably grind those out, knock all those rivets out. We'll get this belting off here next. Okay, in that last clip, I think I said I was going to grind these. I meant drill. Okay, so it's actually the following day after I got those old insulator pads off of that metal piece. I got really busy yesterday. I had a lot of tedious work that I had to get done. First things first, all that stuff came off pretty well. As you can see, not a whole lot left of any of that. So I thought I had some brake lining rivets that were going to work. They were very close to what used to be on there. Trouble is, the shanks here were too small. They were way too loose of a fit in the hole. So I ended up getting busy on the lathe and I custom turned rivets that will pretty much match the old ones perfectly. Let's see if we can do a little bit of a side by side here with one hand. There we go. You can see the heads are pretty close in dimension to what they used to be. That's about a 3/16 shank that will go down through those holes, and that will work just fine. I got the metal strips drilled. Those are 2-inch on center holes. So that will hold the new insulator pads on just fine. You can see I went and peeled a layer of belting off of these. That is so that I could actually countersink those strips down in to make that metal more flush with the surface. I'll show you why here in just a second. Okay, so with the new pads just tacked onto the plate, we haven't trimmed any rivets or peened anything over yet. I'll show you how this is going to fit. We'll align it with the bottom of the radiator tank, and you can see each one of these strips corresponds with that bump in that's in the bottom of the tank. So when the core is flat down against those insulator pads, all of that metal originally was up inside of those indents, and there was no actual metal-to-metal contact between the radiator tank and this bottom piece. But I decided to countersink those metal strips in a bit so that I pretty much only had to worry about those rivet heads sticking up, and I shouldn't have any worry about any metal-to-metal contact down here wearing through the bottom tank. And this is also a good view of why the pad on this side is shorter than the pad on this other side. You can see the tank is a lot flatter over here below that flange, whereas on this side it starts angling up. So they didn't need to have an insulator that was that long anyway. So I think this is going to work just fine. I'll trim these rivets to length, peen them over, and we'll make this piece permanent. Well, that should do it for the bottom piece. Happy with that. So I think the final hurdle I have are these two broken off bolts. So like I said earlier, they thread into that block that's welded in there. That block is just 1/4 inch steel. I've got a lot of that laying around. And of course we're broken off up inside of the outer shell piece. So we're indented in up there. Doesn't exactly make it easy to get to, but we're still down in the threaded holes in the block. Doesn't exactly make it easy to get to. I could drill, but I'll tell you what, I've got a couple ideas in my head. I'm going to try something. I'll let you know how it works. There's one. And number two, look at that. We got them. Well, I got lucky and it worked on the first try. So, a little play-by-play on what just happened. I started out by grinding off the welds that held the block to the bottom of the shell. You can see those there and there. And then I cut the center out of the old threaded block and then welded the holes closed so that I fused the two squares to the broken off bolts. I essentially made a couple of square nuts so that I could get on there with a wrench and turn it and turn the rest of the broken bolts right out. So that's done. What I've done here, I threaded a couple of soft bolts in the bottom and I turned them down to suit the through holes I drilled into the new block. These are drilled 5/16 to facilitate threading. So what that's going to do, those two bolts are going to hold my new block stationary, keep all the holes in line so that I can clamp it. I'll weld this new block in, and then we will use the existing threads in this piece and take a tap right through there and continue the new threads on out the top of the new block. Alright, so we're back to all good threads. So at this point we can take the bottom plate with the insulator pads, set that in there, we'll clamp it in, locate it, and get that welded back in place. All right, so with that, we've got it all back together again, and we fixed everything that was wrong with it. Took the dent out of the top. We don't have any more broken off bolts. We've got good insulator pads down the bottom. Let's stand this up. Oh, there we go. And honestly, I like how that turned out. I think it was a quality repair all around. So that's it's about all the time we have in the shop here today, but yeah, it's going to take a lot more work before the front of the engine has Caterpillar on it. So, but we have a radiator shell surround that should be deserving of that brand new core over there. We did everything we can to make sure that that has a good spot to go back into. So like I said, that's gonna wrap up the shop time for today. Now, all the work I did down the bottom of that shell, replacing those insulator pads, all that stuff, the majority of J-Series D2s, you're probably not gonna have to do that because this is that first gen core that has that really deep bottom tank on it. So like the 212 grader, most of the other J-Series D2s have that really thin, more of a header plate on the bottom of the core that doesn't touch the bottom of that surround anyway. So the type of work I did here for the most part is probably not anything you're going to have to do on any D2. Well, that's not a first gen. So, all right, I think that's about it for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. We're going to keep banging along here. Hope to see you back again.